Imagine this. You know that tech founder, the one who started in a garage with nothing but instant noodles and a revolutionary idea? The one who built a global empire, who went from a worn-out hoodie to bespoke suits, whose face is on every magazine cover. He's the golden boy, the disruptor, the one who proved that with enough grit and genius, you can change the world. He's not just successful, he's beloved. He represents the dream. Now, the story we're about to dive into is about the original version of this guy. And I have to be honest, I first heard it when I was a teenager. Maybe in a history class, maybe somewhere else. I can't quite remember. The version my teacher told was simple. A good guy does a very bad thing. He says he's sorry, God forgives him, and the story ends. Everyone's happy. But that ending, it just never sat right with me. It felt, well, a little too easy. A little too cheap. It's like watching a mystery movie where the killer just says, "My bad," and then the credits roll. There was always this question that lingered in the back of my mind, a question that's haunted me for years. Okay, so he was forgiven. But then what? After you've personally detonated a nuclear bomb in the middle of your own life, can a simple, "I'm sorry," really put everything back the way it was? Because in the real world, the answer is always no. To really understand the heart of this story, we first have to meet its protagonist. His name is David, King David. If you're not familiar with him, don't worry. Here's his lightning-fast resume. A shepherd boy who took down a giant named Goliath with a single slingshot. A charismatic musician. A guerrilla warrior who eventually became the greatest king his nation had ever known. He was brave, brilliant, and people believed he was handpicked by God himself. He was the original superhero, a living legend. But what we're here to talk about today is how this very legend personally burned his entire world to the ground. And this isn't just a story about a fall from grace. It's a map for how to navigate the B side of your life, after the A side is over, and all that's left is the wreckage you personally created. And if you're already curious about where this story is headed, and trust me, its twists will absolutely shock you, then now is the perfect time to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support is the fuel that keeps this whole operation going, and it truly means the world to me. Thank you. Alright, let's get back to it. To understand how a hero can fall so hard, we have to talk about power. Not from a political angle, but a psychological one. And that brings us to a titan in the world of psychology, Philip Zimbardo, and his infamous Stanford prison experiment. You've probably heard of it. He took a group of ordinary, healthy college students and, with the flip of a coin, made half of them prisoners and the other half guards. The result? In less than a few days, those good students playing guards turned into sadistic tyrants. The entire experiment had to be shut down because it spiraled so violently out of control. Zimbardo called this phenomenon the Lucifer Effect, the process by which good people, put into a tempting or powerful enough situation, are seduced into doing evil. This experiment reveals a brutal truth. Sometimes, our environment and the power we're given are far more influential than our own personal character. Now, let's turn the camera back to King David. Folks, he wasn't just a little guard in an experiment. He owned the entire prison. He possessed absolute, unchecked power, and that kind of power is a psychological acid. It eats away at your moral boundaries, it distorts your perception of reality, and it makes you believe, deep down, that the rules are for other people, not for you. And now, we're about to go up on that rooftop, to stand with David in that moment, and to witness firsthand what happens when that psychological acid begins to work. The story unfolds like this. It was one of those lazy afternoons. The king, who should have been on the front lines leading his armies, was instead strolling around his palace. You know, that in itself is a warning sign. The moment you distance yourself from the battles and struggles that made you who you are, trouble is right around the corner. He walks out onto his rooftop and sees a woman named Bathsheba. She's beautiful, and more than that, she is the wife of one of his most loyal soldiers. In that instant, the psychological acid in the king's mind starts to sizzle. The rules? They're for everyone else. The consequences? I'm the king. I can handle it. He doesn't hesitate. He sees, he wants, he sends for her. Pay attention to those verbs. This wasn't a romantic encounter. It was a transaction of power. He has her brought to him, he sleeps with her, and then he sends her home as if nothing happened. A simple, kingly indulgence. The story could have ended right there, a secret known to no one. But life, or perhaps fate, has a way of adding a twist to the script that complicates everything. A few weeks later, a message arrives at the palace. It is short, and it is fatal. Just 3 words. I am pregnant. Now, we have a huge problem. A private indulgence is about to become a public scandal. And David's brain now enters a second phase, a psychological battlefield that every single one of us is familiar with, even if we don't know its name: cognitive dissonance. The term sounds academic, but you definitely know the feeling. It's that buzzing, uncomfortable static in your head when you believe you're an honest person, but you've just told a massive lie to your partner. It's when 2 completely opposite beliefs are having a cage match inside your mind. Inside David's head, the fight looks like this. Belief A, his self-identity. I am David, God's chosen king, the embodiment of justice, the hero of the people. Belief B, the cold, hard reality. I just abused my power, slept with a married woman, and got her pregnant. I am a hypocrite and a sinner. Our brains absolutely hate this conflict. The static is unbearable. The brain will do whatever it takes to make it stop. There are usually only 2 ways out. Either you change your behavior to match belief A, for example, by immediately confessing and accepting the punishment, or you have to find a way to distort reality and get rid of belief B. David, the great king, chose the latter. He initiates crisis management plan. A. Recall Bathsheba's husband, a loyal soldier named Uriah, from the front lines. The plan is simple, right? Let Uriah come home, spend a night or 2 with his wife, and then the question of who the baby's father is gets conveniently fuzzy. The threat posed by belief B would be perfectly concealed. But here's where we get to the most ironic and the most tragic part of the entire story. Uriah, this man of integrity, returns home and refuses to go inside his own house. He says, "My comrades are sleeping on the hard ground on the battlefield. How could I go home to eat and drink and enjoy myself?" And so he sleeps on the palace steps with the servants. Uriah's loyalty acts like a mirror, reflecting David's own corruption. Plan A, because of one good man's honor, is a complete failure. Now, the static in David's head has become a piercing alarm. He's backed into a corner. His heroic image, his belief A, is on the verge of shattering. To save that image, he must resort to more extreme measures. He has to make belief B, I have sinned, disappear from the world entirely. So, he launches Plan B. He writes a letter with his own hand. The letter contains an order to his top general. Put Uriah in the front line where the fighting is fiercest. Then, pull back from him. He takes this letter, his own death warrant, and hands it to Uriah himself to deliver. And Uriah, carrying the trust of his king, rides to the front line, and, just as planned, is killed in battle. The problem is solved. The alarm of cognitive dissonance is silenced. David marries the widow Bathsheba and covers everything up. The heroic image in his mind is, for the moment, safe. He has erased a smaller sin with a much greater one. He has successfully deceived everyone, except for one person. And now, the real show is about to begin. Because when the most powerful man in a nation is lost in a fog of self-deception, sometimes you need a storyteller who is brave enough to speak the truth and wake him up. And this man's arrival is about to push the entire story to its absolute climax. So, David has it all figured out. The loyal husband, Uriah, is now just another casualty number on a battle report. His widow, Bathsheba, is now the queen. Everything appears seamless. The war in his head between belief A, I'm a good king, and belief B, I've sinned, seems to have ended in a landslide victory for belief A. He's used the heavy lead blanket of his power to muffle all the noise. He thinks, it's over. But there's a saying, you can fool all the people some of the time, and some of the people all the time, but you cannot fool all the people all the time. Especially when the one person you can't fool shows up with a receipt from God to settle your account. This person's name is Nathan. He's a prophet of that time. Now, we need to redefine the word prophet. Don't picture a mystic with a crystal ball muttering fortunes. Think of him more like a national advisor with guts of steel and a PhD in human psychology. His job is to speak the truths that the most powerful person in the country absolutely does not want to hear. You can imagine the risks involved in that line of work. When Nathan walks into the palace, he knows perfectly well that if he opens with, "Hey king, you're a despicable murderer and adulterer," he probably won't live for another 5 minutes. A direct accusation would just trigger David's royal defense system, causing him to build walls, or worse, to lash out. So, Nathan does something incredibly brilliant. He doesn't bring an accusation, he brings a story. This is a psychological Trojan horse. He knows that a person's defense mechanisms can repel a direct assault, but very few people can resist a good story. He stands before David and begins, "Your Majesty, there were 2 men in a certain town, one rich and one poor. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing, except one little ewe lamb he had bought. He raised it, and it grew up with him and his children. It shared his food, drank from his cup, and even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him." You see how Nathan slows down here? He makes you feel the poor man's deep emotional connection to this single lamb. Then, he pivots. Now a traveler came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for him. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man, the one he treasured, and killed it, and prepared it for his guest. The story is over. David listens, and he explodes in anger. His sense of justice, the very thing that had been suppressed, the part of him that made him a hero in the first place, is instantly reignited. He slams his fist down and roars at Nathan. "As surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this must die. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over, because he did such a thing and had no pity." The trap has been set. The psychological Trojan horse has been willingly pulled inside the gates of David's own mind. He has just, with his own mouth, condemned his own sin. Nathan watches him quietly. The whole palace is probably echoing with the king's furious breaths. And then, he delivers what might be the heaviest, most fatal line in the entire story. He doesn't shout. He probably just speaks calmly, looking the king directly in the eye, and says, "You are that man." Boom. In that 1 second, the gates of the Trojan horse are kicked open. The shell of the story instantly vanishes, revealing the cold, poisoned truth inside. All of David's psychological defenses, in that moment, completely crumble. All the excuses he built, all the fortresses of self-deception, are leveled to the ground by those 4 words. The noise of cognitive dissonance that he had suppressed with power and murder comes roaring back with the force of a tsunami. He has nowhere left to run. The great King David, the undefeated hero, doesn't argue, he doesn't shout, he doesn't call for the guards, he just breaks. He looks at Nathan and says the simplest and heaviest words possible. "I have sinned against the Lord." And right here, my friends, is where 90% of the retellings of this story fade to black. A hero who sinned, bravely confessed his mistake, and received God's forgiveness. A perfect, closed loop of a morality tale, right? Wrong. That is not the end of the story. It's not even the climax. This, right here, is the intermission. What he just confessed to is not the end of the line, but the starting point for the B-side of his life. The forgiveness he receives is not a get-out-of-jail-free card that erases all punishment. It is merely a ticket that allows him to live and to watch the tragedy that he himself directed play out, right to its very final scene. The real story, the long and painful story about the consequences, is only just beginning. All right, let's flip that record over and look at the B-side. We just left David in the most shattered moment of his life. He has confessed his sin, and the prophet Nathan has told him that God has taken away your sin. You are not going to die. Okay, folks, that sentence, that promise of forgiveness, is the most easily misunderstood, and also the most critical turning point in the entire story. When we modern people hear the word forgiveness, we picture a computer operation. Select the file named sin, drag it to the trash, empty the trash, done. Everything's back to factory settings. But that's not how ancient wisdom works, and it's certainly not how real life works. The forgiveness Nathan delivered was not a consequence delete button. It was more like someone handing you a fireproof suit in the middle of a forest fire that you started yourself. You won't be burned to death, but you are required to stand there, to live, and to watch the forest you once loved burn to the ground, tree by tree, right in front of your eyes. And the person who lit the match was you. What David received was exactly that, a fireproof suit. He survived, but the rest of his life became a long live broadcast of the consequences. The first domino he pushed over is now about to set off a chain reaction. The first domino to fall is the child he had with Bathsheba. After the baby is born, he becomes deathly ill. David tears his clothes, lies on the ground all night, fasting and praying to God. But after 7 days, the child dies. This is the first bill to come due. It is direct, and it is brutal. He abused his power and took a life, Uriah's. Now, an innocent life is lost in return. It's a painful, one-for-one exchange. But that is just the beginning. The truly horrific consequences unfold within his seemingly perfect family. Because once the moral compass of a family is broken at the very top, the entire system begins to spin wildly, and the needle points toward destruction. Soon, the second domino falls. David's firstborn son, the crown prince Amnon, becomes obsessed with his own half-sister, Tamar. He uses his status as a prince, pretends to be ill, lures Tamar into his room, and rapes her. Do you see the echo here? A man in power, using his status to forcibly take a woman for his own pleasure. Isn't that an exact copy of what David himself did on that rooftop? The script he wrote is now being performed, word for word, by his own son. And when David finds out about this, what does he do? The story says he was furious. And then? Nothing. He does nothing. He doesn't punish Amnon. Why? Because he has lost the moral high ground. How can he pass judgment on a son who has committed the very same type of sin as he did? That one compromise on the rooftop has led to the complete bankruptcy of his authority as a father and a king. David's silence pushes over the third, and bloodiest, domino. Tamar's full brother, Absalom, a handsome, proud prince with a fire of vengeance burning in his heart, sees his father do nothing, and decides to take matters into his own hands. 2 years later, he plots and murders his older brother, Amnon, to avenge his sister. See, another echo, using murder as a means to correct a wrong, to cover it up, and bring it to a close. Isn't this, again, a copy of what David did to Uriah? The fire that started on that rooftop has now burned its way into the very bones of his children. Lies, lust, murder. These viruses have spread from him, the source, and infected his entire household. But the heaviest, most devastating fourth domino is still to come. Absalom, exiled for his crime, is eventually allowed to return by David, but the rift between father and son is beyond repair. Absalom begins to win over the hearts of the people with his charm, intercepting those who come to the king for justice at the city gates, telling them, "Your claims are valid and right." But the king won't listen to you. "Oh, if only I were king, I would give you justice." Eventually, he launches a full-blown rebellion. The most humiliating moment of David's life arrives. He, the great king, must flee his own capital, barefoot, with his head covered, weeping, because his favorite son is hunting him down to kill him and steal his throne. In the final battle of this civil war, Absalom is defeated. While trying to escape, his famously long hair gets caught in the branches of a tree, leaving him dangling in mid-air, where he is killed by David's general. When the news of his death reaches David, the king who has just won the war and saved his crown feels no joy. He goes up to a room over the gate and weeps, crying out the most heart-wrenching words a father can say, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom! If only I had died instead of you, O Absalom, my son, my son." In that moment, you finally understand what the cruelest punishment for him truly was. It wasn't losing his throne, and it wasn't death. It was being forced to live. To live, wide awake, and watch how the tiny, dark seed he planted all those years ago grew into a giant, twisted tree, and then to see its bitter fruit fall and crush all of his children, and smash the rest of his life to pieces. So, here's the question. If this is what forgiveness looks like, then what's the point? If you have to go through all of this anyway, what value is there in being told your sin is taken away? This is the ultimate question this ancient story asks us, and it's what we'll explore in our final part. What can we possibly take away from all this wreckage? All right, we've finally arrived at the heart of the ruins. We're looking at David, the one-time hero, now a figure from a Greek tragedy, having lost his children, his family, and everything he was once proud of. And we're all left with that hanging question. If this is life after forgiveness, then what is the meaning of forgiveness at all? The answer, I believe, is the very reason this story has survived for 3,000 years and can still shake us to our core today. That phrase, "your sin is taken away," was not meant to erase the consequences. It was meant to give David the strength to endure the consequences. This is a profound psychological truth. You can imagine that after making such a colossal mistake, the thing most likely to crush a person is not the external punishment, but the internal, annihilating weight of guilt and shame. That feeling alone is enough to make a person completely break down, give up, or even self-destruct. God's forgiveness, in this context, was like throwing a life raft to a man who was about to drown in his own guilt. You're still in the freezing ocean, the storm is still raging, and everything you've lost is still gone forever, but you won't sink. You are given the ability to stay afloat, to face it all, to experience it all, to feel it all. It didn't remove the pain, but it gave the pain a boundary, making it bearable. And here, I want to bring in one last titan, the Austrian psychiatrist Viktor Frankl. He was himself a survivor of the Nazi concentration camps, and in that hell on earth, he developed a revolutionary idea. He said that the last of the human freedoms, the one thing that can never be taken away from a person, is the freedom to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. You cannot control what happens to you, but you can always control how you respond. The second half of David's life is a long, painful demonstration of Frankl's theory in practice. He could not turn back time, he could not bring Uriah back to life, and he could not undo the shattering of his family. But he could choose what kind of man he would be in the face of this unchangeable reality that he himself had created. He could have chosen to be consumed by bitterness and hatred and become a tyrant. Or, he could choose to carry the full weight of his consequences for the rest of his life. He chose the latter. If you read his later Psalms, you'll find that the once invincible hero has vanished. In his place is a voice that is hoarse, broken, but also, because of that, more humble and more profound. He didn't heal his trauma, but he learned to live with it. And that, folks, is the ultimate wisdom this story wants to hand to us. It redefines what growth really is. It redefines what heroism really is. The hero stories we grow up with are all about slaying the external giant, winning the victory, and maintaining a perfect A-side life. But David's story tells us that there is a more difficult, and far more noble, kind of heroism that exists on the B-side. This heroism is about accountability. It's about having the courage to look at the mess you've made, to admit, "I did this," and to choose not to run away. It's about what happens after you've screwed everything up, and you still choose to stay and clean up the rubble, piece by piece, even when you know it will never look the same again. It's about how every one of us, after making our own irreversible mistakes, chooses to live out our own, and then what? Every one of us, folks, has a B-side to our lives. Maybe not as dramatic as David's, thank goodness, but we all have regrets. We all have choices we wish we could take back. We all live with the consequences of our own past actions. This 3,000-year-old story is like a map. It shows us that the most important parts of life often don't happen when you're climbing to the peak, but during the long journey of learning how to walk again after you've fallen. And so, in the end, this ancient story doesn't leave us with a simple moral answer. It leaves us with a profound choice. The real question it asks us is not, how can I avoid failure? But rather the more important, and much harder question. When I am standing in the ruins I myself created, who do I choose to be? Every chord? Thank you all for listening, and good night, my friends.